Advaita Vedanta is one of the major schools of Hinduism and is accepted by followers as a religion, yet many regard it as a philosophical system. The lack of clear sacred and profane division discussed by Durkheim make it difficult to classify. It is a non-dual view of reality where the world is seen as a matter of arbitrary names and forms, subject to constant change, but underlined by a transcendent consciousness. The main proponent of Advaita was Adi Shankara, a Hindu scholar and traveler who spread his ideas through India around the 8th century. Advaita remains relevant by involving few concepts and minimal metaphysical assumptions. An emphasis on phenomenality links it to Buddhism, thus possibly representing the most important expression of syncretic Indian thought. Shankara is said to have been partly responsible for driving Buddhists out of India and can be seen as a representative of Hinduism against Buddhism. It's possible that Shankara did not totally disagree with Buddhism, but was fearful that it would destroy Vedanta in India. Many have criticized him as a crypto-Buddhist for undermining caste, traditional ritual duty, and devotion. Both Advaita Vedantins and Madhyamaka Buddhists agree that ultimate reality cannot be understood in a dualistic manner, and both suggest this reality cannot be an object of knowledge. It is indescribable. For Buddhists, the rejection of dualism is based on the idea that everything lacks an essential nature, or a self. The Vedantin, however, sees the bondage to conditioned reality and constant rebirth as resulting from ignorance of the non-difference of the self and Brahman, which is defined as pure consciousness or ultimate reality. Both Vedantins and Buddhists wish to end the cycles of conditioned reality and rebirth called samsara. For Buddhist scholar Bhaviveka, Atman, or the self, is, quote, nothing more than a superimposition of a conceptual construction, and as such Vedantins are criticized for false clinging, end quote. For both, however, attachment to the individual self is a major error. Shankara criticized Buddhist schools, which scholars broadly divide into three categories. First are the realists, who admit the existence of external objects, then idealists, who admit the existence of consciousness only, and lastly, the skeptics, who are proponents of the voidness of all things. Scholars of Eastern philosophy have typically displayed excessive emotional involvement and clear positionality in studies of Advaita Vedanta's relation to Buddhism and whether or not Adi Shankara was a crypto-Buddhist or vice versa. This is counterintuitive as both religions stress the importance of objectivity. The Hindu-emic perspective is that similarities to Buddhism are irrelevant and are used to undermine Shankara as a Hindu philosopher and religious reformer. Hindus may cite his elaboration on the main difference between Buddhism and Vedanta, being that Hindus believe the self to be identical with the universe, where Buddhists believe there is no self. Shankara was criticized for not understanding Buddhism, and while he did completely agree with Buddhism on some points, he was vehemently against the doctrine of no self, among other terms. Devout Buddhists will say he had an insufficient outside understanding of Buddhism, and as a result argued against ideas that he was not actually entirely opposed to. Conversely, some Vedantins and Buddhists of other schools, such as Bhaviveka, have criticized Madhyamaka Buddhism for being crypto-Vedantin, by showing how some concepts align with Vedantic ones. The emic Madhyamaka perspective is that, quote, whatever is well said in the Vedanta has all been taught by the Buddha, end quote. Religious groups are not exempt from becoming engrossed in owning words, and the debates between Advaita Vedanta and Mahayana Buddhist schools may result from theological polemics, more so than actual philosophical disagreements. Polemics are rhetoric concerned with social divides and ownership of words meant to undermine opposing positions. A contemporary example exists in mainstream media between those who identify as Republicans and those who identify as Democrats. Another one is changing French fries into freedom fries. Grahaka and Graya are Buddhist terms for perceiver and perceived. Shankara uses these to argue with Buddhists, but he does not use them in Advaita arguments, which suggest strong linguistic polemics. Yet, not only the definition, but the notion that the duality of Grahaka and Graya is a problem is agreed upon by both Vedantins and Buddhists. Ajativada, the doctrine of non-origination, is the idea that nothing has really ever come into existence, and it is derived from Buddhism, but is important terminology for Advaita thought as well. Ajatavita suggests an absolute reality which is without any qualities. In this respect, one of the only things differentiating the two religions is the division between seer, seen, and seeing. For Shankara, the difference is no more real than the circle of light emanating from torches. Madhyamaka Buddhists are criticized by Shankara for holding the belief that the mind is born and self-effulgent. Today it could be said that Buddhism lost the polemic battle, being it all but left mainstream India after the resurgence of Vedanta, but it was victorious in that it had become an integral part of Hindu thought via Advaita Vedanta and the philosophical war waged between the two. Daniel H. Ingalls suggested that there is such little difference between Madhyamaka Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta that any discussion on the matter is rendered pointless, at least from the etic perspective. However, from the emic, there is still obviously something worth discussing and arguing over. Richard King takes the perspective that Shankara was not a crypto-Buddhist, but was undeniably influenced by it. The scholarly consensus seems to be that it is impossible to draw a precise division line between Buddhism and Vedanta due to their syncretic nature. If self means lacking one's own individual nature, then Madhyamaka Buddhism and Vedanta may be in agreement. Parallels between Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism can be seen in linguistics, some texts, and also in practices. Nirvana and Brahman may be seen as different explanations for the same experience of escape from rebirth and conditioned existence. Looking at Shankara's way of dealing with and being more opposed to certain schools of Buddhism and vice versa can reveal much thought about Indian thought, as well as the philosophical similarities and differences between different schools.